So one of the things we can do is to float something out of the normal flow. So notice how things are flowing. It's just one after another. If we look at our code, it just goes down. It does the heading. Well, we go to the very top, right? It starts with a heading, then the list, then a heading, then a paragraph, and it goes down this list table, then this image, then this heading, the browser. It's just one after another, very linearly. Well, we have the option to float something. So I'm going to go ahead, and what I want to float is this image. So I want you to look at this image. It has a table above it and some heading, a couple headings and paragraphs below it. So I'm going to, this turns out to be my only image, so I don't have to give it a class value. If I had more than one, then I could give it a class value. So my image, I want it to float, and now I can do right or left. And I want it to float left, actually. So I save that. Okay, you follow along and float your image and see what happens. So what happened? Remember before that all these things were below it? Well, what happens is when you float it, it moves that element out of the normal flow and it lets everything flow up in place. Now, it pushes aside the text, right? So the text doesn't go behind, but notice how this whole paragraph really flows up behind it. And so the whole border and background color all flows up behind it, but the text is pushed over to the side. So when you float something, whatever is below it floats up behind that element, and the text is pushed off to the side. So there we can push that off that way. Now, I really just want this browser style sheets and that paragraph to be off to the side of it. And I don't want this navigation list. It's like, oh no, I want this to go below. That looks really bad to have that paragraph going up under there. So I can control that as well. So what I want to do is, these are okay floating, is I want to stop the flow right here on that heading navigation list. So I have more, that's this heading right here, and I have multiple heading 2s. So I'm going to set a style just on this one. So I'm going to add class again. Let me do this. Let me add ID, which is another way to name an element. So let me use ID. The difference between class and ID. Class names an element, and you can have multiple elements with exactly the same class value. IDs uniquely identify an element. So you would never use the same ID more than once. It would be very unique. So I'm going to call this my nav. No, what should I call this? It's my nav list paragraph, or heading 2. So I'm going to save that. Now the way I select an ID is with a pound sign. So this is a heading 2. I can do it a couple ways. I can do heading 2 pound, or I can just do an element with ID set to nav list. Okay? So instead of a dot, when you're using ID, you use a pound. And what I want to do here is I want to clear it. And what clear does is it clears it from any floating elements. And so I want to clear it on the left. So that won't allow anything to float left to it. And I can use right or both. So here, watch what happens. So there it clears, and it won't allow anything on the to float on the left of it. And that pushes it down below. All right, go ahead and clear that on yours. Now notice the next thing that really is bothering me here is how tight these things are up against that image. So I'm going to add a margin, and I'm going to add it right to the image because that'll make it have that margin all the way around it. So on my image, add a margin, and you add a margin on yours, and this doesn't have to be too big. And refresh. And there we've made some gaps so things aren't right up against it. Added that. Added some margin there. So there's float and clear.